Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
Several people sent me this story, including Paul and Dan, and we've discussed identity theft on this program before. But identity theft usually means that somebody took out a credit card in your name or did something like that where there's a financial injury but not much else. It might cost you some money to clean it up. It might be a pain in the rear, but, you can move on. Well, here's a story about a guy who, because his identity got stolen, he wound up in a mental hospital. And this one is crazy. I mean, I don't like to use that word that much, but a former Iowa hospital administrator pleads guilty to decades-long identity theft scheme. Luke Malik wrote this to WHO13.com, and the story's out of Iowa. So I'm going to talk about these people as the imposter and the victim, okay? The imposter and the victim. A former administrator, who is the imposter, at an Iowa hospital, assumed another man's identity for over 3 decades. He's now pleaded guilty to identity theft, and he's in a bit of trouble. But this went on for 30 years. Now, the man is 58 years old, who is the imposter. He's from Heartland, Wisconsin. He was convicted of 1 count of false statements to a National Credit Union Administration insured institution and 1 count of aggravated identity theft, according to the Department of Justice. His actions resulted in his victim being falsely imprisoned for over a year and at one point in a mental hospital. According to the evidence in the case, the victim was a coworker of his at a hot dog cart in Albuquerque in the late 1980s. And so the imposter took the identity and completely assumed it for the following 3 decades. He got fake documents, including a birth certificate from Kentucky, in the victim's name. So the imposter was then hired eventually as a high-level administrator at a hospital in Iowa City in 2013. He gave the hospital fake information, including a false I-9 form, fake social security number, and date of birth. Once hired, he worked remotely from Wisconsin. So for 6 years, he took out loans totaling over $200,000 from 2 credit unions in Iowa using the victim's personal information. In 2019, the victim, who was homeless at the time, found that his credit was being used, which had left him with large amounts of debt. So to try to fix that, the victim went to the branch of the National Bank in Los Angeles saying he didn't want to pay the debt and requesting that his accounts be closed. He presented his real identification, and then he was asked security questions which he was unable to answer because he'd been set by the imposter. The bank then called the police. Officers called the imposter by phone, who said he was living in Wisconsin and didn't give anyone in California permission to access his bank accounts. So he then faxed the LAPD fake documents, resulting in the arrest of the victim on 2 felony charges. He was held without bail in the Los Angeles County Jail. Over the following months, the imposter continued to contact the LAPD and Los Angeles District Attorney on the status of the prosecution, while the victim continued to assert that he was not the man they were looking for. A judge found the victim not to be mentally competent and ordered him to a mental hospital. Presumably one of the problems is that he didn't admit that he was who he was saying he wasn't. So the victim pleaded no contest to charges in 2021 in exchange for a time-served sentence and immediate release from custody. And so quite often, if somebody pleads guilty to something, we look at them and go, they probably did it. You might say, Steve, why would anybody plead guilty to something they didn't do? Well, quite often, if you sat in jail for a year and they go, oh, by the way, if you plead guilty, we'll sentence you to 6 months in jail and give you credit for time served to get out tomorrow. A lot of people will take that deal. A lot of people will. So he spent a total of 428 days in jail and 147 days in a mental hospital due to the imposter's false reports to the LAPD and the district attorney. The state court also ordered the victim to only use their true name from then on, and I'm not quite sure what exactly is going on there because his true name was the same one that had been hijacked by the imposter. So the victim continued to try to reclaim his identity while the imposter continued to make false reports and statements to law enforcement in both Wisconsin and California. Hey, some guy's using my information. So in January 2023, the victim found where the imposter was employed, contacted the hospital, and the hospital then contacted law enforcement, and a detective was hired to investigate. In the following months, the detective uncovered the imposter's scheme. The detective got DNA evidence that showed that the imposter was not the son of the man in Kentucky that the victim was instead the son of. And it turns out that the imposter said, yeah, my father lives in Kentucky. And they went and checked, and there's no DNA connection, but there's a DNA connection with the victim. However, when the imposter was shown the DNA evidence, he admitted to the 3-decade identity theft. He also admitted to giving false documents to Los Angeles authorities to aid in the arrest, prosecution, and incarceration of the victim. And of course, the victim didn't deserve any of that. So now the imposter is in the custody of the U.S. Marshal until his sentencing at a later date. He is set to serve somewhere from 2 to 32 years in prison, along with a $1.25 million fine and 5 years of supervised release after any imprisonment. Case was investigated by the FBI and the University of Iowa Police Department. A lot of people are going to suggest the same thing I'm about to say, and that is, too bad they can't sentence him to half a year in a mental institution, because that's what happened to his victim. And so it's unclear from this story why he stole this guy's identity, because most people are fine with the one they've got until they trashed it. And so there's a very good chance that this guy had, quite early in his life, destroyed his identity or his credit or something. He had done something that would not allow him. He's kind of done with his name. He needed a new one. So at the hot dog stand, it says hot dog cart, got the other guy's information, moved out of state and began using that. And it just so happens that the guy he stole it from fell on hard times. So that guy might not have noticed right away that someone else is using his information. That could very well explain what's going on there. But the fact of the matter is that somewhere down the road, hundreds of thousands of dollars of loans are taken out in his name. He finds out about it, and then he gets arrested and at one point tossed in a mental institution because he keeps insisting that somebody is doing this to him. And this is one of the craziest stories I've heard. And we've heard similar stories where, the person is a victim, nobody believes them for a little while. And so my hat is off to the investigators who, when they got a phone call and somebody said, hey, there's a guy in Wisconsin who's stolen my identity and is ruining my life, that instead of going, oh, yeah, sure, they decided to look into it. And they looked into it and discovered, oh, wait a second, the guy's telling the truth. Meanwhile, how does somebody become a hospital administrator when their whole life is a lie? Because, does that job not require diplomas or education? And if so, was all that fake too? So I'm really curious about the complete story behind what the imposter managed to pull off with this guy's information and how he managed to do it for so long. But the guy's name is not that unusual. But, you never know these days. So that's the story, and it is quite wild. And so the guy's going to get, I'm guessing, at least a couple of years in prison. But it says here he could get up to 32. And I hope that the victim can go to the hearing and tell the court what it did to his life. Because otherwise, the judge might get a written report, and written reports to say, yeah, guy spent a couple of years in jail, blah, 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 blah. It's much more impactful to have the guy standing there and explain it to you. Like, Judge, do you understand this? I was locked in a mental institution because I was trying to explain that this was happening to me. And nobody believed me. And I also spent time in jail because of this man. And oh, by the way, my credit is destroyed. The guy borrowed hundreds of thousands of dollars in my name. And then he actively went out of his way to have me prosecuted. It's one thing when the other guy in California pops up and says, hey, wait, that's me. But he actually said, no, I can prove. He's the guy who's pulling the scam here. He's a little cuckoo. So it's a crazy one. I hope we hear about the sentencing. Please, my friends in Wisconsin, follow this one. I got good friends in Wisconsin. Got good friends everywhere. Former Iowa hospital administrator pleads guilty to decades-long identity theft scheme. Luke Malik wrote that for WHO13.com. Paul and Dan and a few others sent to me. Thanks a lot. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law.
Lost a job as a stage designer. Left without making a scene.